on like a regular whiteboard. But it's even harder with this. All right, so what are we talking about today? We're talking about traversing two verticals. What does this even mean, traversing two verticals?
Hey, Mike, would you like to record? Oh, never mind.
It's already recording. There's a page. Let's all get on it. I'm in a weird mood today. I've got like I don't even drink coffee. Like this is all natural. So, what does even traversing two verticals mean? Look, no, that is a box. I don't want a box. I want the pen. Pen. Draw. There we go. Cool. And so what we're talking about today is this big kind of picture, kind of talking about like how essentially we're going to solve a lot of your problems, like in structuring your program, having the prerequisite pieces kind of talk to each other, how we can speed up your testing. Yeah, who wouldn't like to speed up their testing? I've seen some comments in your CodeApp channel about like how some of your test suites are running a little slow, and the idea is that we can kind of break this up, and we have some techniques to kind of talk about. And I want to talk about like we're going to start. I think this is the first class we're starting to bring a lot of these ideas together, right? And so when we have what you probably may be your application so far is that we might have like. That's your stat tracker, right? And so your stat tracker is going and it's making your game objects, right? And it's using like CSV to do that. I'm only going to draw 3, but pretend that there's like however many game objects there are, that's how many creates. Using the CSV again, it's going to make team objects, right? And I'm not going to draw lines, but we also have game team objects, right? And you have all your methods inside your stat tracker that do all the math, right? That's inside. I should have left myself some more room, but does this look familiar to what you perhaps have done so far? I see some head nods. Well, I see some head shakes. And so why is this all this happening in here not great? Any volunteers about why perhaps we don't like this? Or shall I pick a volunteer? Whoever's looking right at the camera. Oh, no, who's avoiding? Oh, I got a hand. I can't see who's reading the hand. Garrett.
I mean, I'm definitely not confident. I mean, I'm just assuming like you don't want.
Just say it. Just say it. There's no right or wrong here.
I mean, it just doesn't seem like you'd want like just that one class doing quite literally everything.
Yeah, that's totally right. Right? It's like this idea is that this is doing way too much. And what does that break? Breaks SRP. Single. Ooh, no. All right, I'm not going to write any more long words, I promise. But that's a single responsibility principle, right? We have this idea that we want to, we kind of want to put this so like every object you kind of make has responsibility over one thing, and that's what we kind of want to aim towards. Can I go ahead and erase this? I need some more room. Yeah, this is recorded anyway. I do what I want. Drawings. Cool. And so what I would suggest doing to kind of like fix this is that we have your stat tracker, right? And what your stat tracker does is that it creates these managers. Manager is the word I'm going to use here. It has many different names that you call it. I feel that manager feels like a right term because it's in charge of things. And so we have a team manager, a game manager, and a game team manager. Right. And it is the team manager that is responsible for the teams. The game manager, oops, that's a G, I promise, is responsible for the games, and the game team manager is responsible for the game teams. And the idea is that we have this hierarchy that kind of cascades upon creation. When we start up the stat tracker, it is going to initialize your team manager, your game manager, game team manager. This is not going to get difficult later at all. And in each in turn, like your team manager, when it's instantiated, it's like, hey, I have come into existence. What I'm now going to do is that I'm going to load up the CSV file, the CSV, and essentially we may have a CSV kind of object here that's responsible for the CSV stuff that all these three talk to get the information. And I'm not and let's just talk about the team manager as a slice. What we're going to do is that this team manager is going to tell the CSV stuff. It's going to, like, the team manager should know where the team file, the team CSV is going to send that path to the CSV object, and the CSV object is going to give us this this array of hash-like objects, right? And the team manager is now going to make a bunch of team objects, and the team objects are going to live as an attribute of the team manager. So the team manager is responsible for holding all these team objects, and ditto for the child objects of the game manager and the game team manager. Is that everyone track so far? And so this is fine, right? Like, so like the team manager would have in it methods like, hey, I have this ID number for a team. Go get me that team. The game manager has a method that says, like, hey, I have this ID for a game. Go get me that thing. Or it could find, or any other kind of like these searcher methods you've probably gone through, right? And those would be the domain of the team manager. But here's the question. Like, the question is, like, what do we do when we need to jump from place to place? Right? That gets a little messy, doesn't it? In this idea that where logic goes. And like the idea is that, okay, so if we have that, like, what does the stat manager do? What is the responsibility of the stat manager here? What are the responsibility of these individual team objects? And the kind of one of the big ideas that we want to kind of impress upon in this project is that we want to push logic down towards this direction as much as possible. The idea here is that your stat tracker should really ideally be this traffic cop. Whereas that all they're doing is the one of those people that stand at the intersection and kind of manage the flow of data. And so let's say that what happens is, like, if I'm a team, right? And a team wants to get, there's probably a calculation that requires the team to get its, like, let's say you want to get all the games that the team has played in, right? So if we were to do that, like, with this hierarchy, what would we have to do to make this work? Jesse, what do you think? I feel you have thoughts.
Maybe we would have to go through stat tracker here to work our way back up this hierarchy.
Yep, that is one approach. Why not just ask the game manager that? Doesn't the game manager know? Eduardo, what do you think?
I'm thinking that you could probably ask the game manager if it's stored all of its instances somewhere, and you can access those instances.
Yeah, I think that the idea here is that, like, the game manager knows if I'm a team, but I think the tricky part here is that what we're doing is that we're creating a link here and a link back this way. And let's say that we have to do that with everything else. Game team manager is going to, game team is going to be linked to game manager and also the team manager. Game teams are going to be linked to this and this. And like, this is just with 3 objects or 3 types of objects. I've now made a map that's essentially incomprehensible, haven't I? What if an interface here changes? How many other places do I need to change things? That's kind of rough, isn't it? Right? Like at least 2, maybe 3, potentially 4, depending on how you did it. But the thing, and so what Jesse was talking about is a great idea, is that we kind of want to go up this way and kind of back, and is whereas before, where if we were to, oh, I have this, let's I'm just gonna make 1 here, just so I give myself a little more room. The idea is that when we go from team to game manager, that's just like the 1 step, right? That's easy. We just make that jump. But if we were to kind of go what we're talking about with Jesse, we'd have to do 1, 2, 3 to kind of get that information, right? And so what we're doing here, this is one of those fascinating things. I hate writing with this thing. It's called a trade-off. Why did I have to write that? It's a trade-off. The idea is that, yeah, this is a slower process because we have to make 4 jumps to get that information. But the advantage here is that we are reducing complexity so much. The idea here is that in this kind of diagram, of this hierarchy we created, we are no longer creating any additional links to other objects that are not already kind of bound together, right? Like I think that it makes sense for all of us to say that, hey, a team and a team manager, that makes total sense that those are linked together. A team manager and a team manager and a stat tracker, that makes a lot of sense that those are linked together. If I were telling you, yeah, you know, in my team object, I gotta go require a game manager, and you're like, what? What does a team have to do with games? And though there is a link that way, like it is not intuitive to kind of that's not very intuitive to kind of get that, you know, to have that link together. And so what we want to do is that, let's say, for example, for our teams, we want a method on the team that will return us all of its games, right? And so how that would work is like, hey, team, I want to make a method called games. And the idea here is that, like, okay, so I'm a team object. I don't know anything about games. Who do I know? Who can I talk to? Nick, who can I talk to? Who can a team talk to?
I'm pretty confused. Can I pass here?
Yeah, sure. Let's do Jose. If I'm a team, who do I know?
I'm also in the same boat.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So the idea is that these are the links, right? A team manager knows about teams, right? Because that's kind of linked between the two, right? And so if a team wants to know whose its games are, it can only ask one thing, right? It has to ask the team manager because that's the only link it has. And so we get to the team manager and we're just like, hey, team manager, I want to know, I have this, my team ID is 4, right? Can you tell me all the games that are associated with the team ID 4? And so the team manager is like, well, I'm a team manager. I don't know anything about games, but who does the team manager know? Oh, we see Jose with that moment of realization. I love to see it. Jose, would you like to tell us, who does the team manager know?
The ST, the stat
tracker, right? So the team manager is like, hey, stat tracker, I don't know anything about games, but I think you do. I've got this team ID of 4. How about you go and find me all the teams that have an ID of 4? And the stat tracker is like, okay, I'm a stat tracker. I don't know anything about games, but who does the stat tracker know that knows things about games? Nick?
The game manager knows things about games.
Exactly. So the stat tracker is going to say, hey, buddy, game manager, I've got this team ID of 4. Can you grab me all the teams whose ID matches 4? And the game manager's like, yep. And so the game manager has a method that returns out the stat tracker that gets returned to team manager. Team manager returns that to the team. And that is how we kind of create these connections. So the idea here is that when this is incredibly resilient to change, because let's say that the game manager has to change how it figures out games or something, you only have to make a change in the stat tracker. Any changes you make are isolated to the next step over. If I were to make any changes here in, can I change color? Yes. If I make any changes here when everything was intertwined, I would potentially have to make a change for every team file, every game team file, potentially the other managers as well. If we're building this interlocking web of things. And so when we do this way, if any changes happen here, usually we just need to make a change upward and a change downward. Maybe not even the downward sometimes, depending on how, what the code is in the details. And so now, what we do here, and this is the idea, is that each thing, this here is a vertical. This here is a vertical. This here is a vertical. And we're showing you how we can get from one place to another. We are not jumping across, because when we jump across, we start doing this, and like, am I missing lines? There are probably some extra lines. No, that one goes to that one. Nope, we're missing a line here. That probably, no, that one go here. You know, like, do you want to decipher this in code? No, no one wants to do this. And so we want to build out this structure so that we talk up and down, up and down. And so here, one of the side benefits is that this is how we can make testing so much faster. Previously, for every single method, if things were kind of like a little like this or a little kind of jumbled like this, if we wanted to test just the team, what would we have to load up? Well, we'd have to load up probably the game teams, the game team manager, the game manager, the team manager, maybe the stat tracker. And so you're loading up everything, including all that CSV, even if it's fixture data, all that stuff. And that is going to just slow down your test suite incredibly. What do we have to test if we kind of stick to this pattern of, let me pick another color. When we have this structure, what we have to test is the link. Using mocks and stubs, when you test that can a team talk to its team manager, you don't have to load up the team manager. You stub that out. You make sure it responds to the appropriate method, and that method exists. You don't need to make sure that it's going there. When you're testing team manager, you should be already testing you're creating teams, right? Like that should be doing. You should be testing it holds teams and find teams, like cool. And do you have to test a stat tracker? No. You just need to mock and stub this out, and that you check that this here has the appropriate method that team manager's looking for. Cool. At this point, well, you just got to test it as a game manager. And like for the game manager, you're already testing that a game manager can find a game manager can find a game with an appropriate team ID, right? Your finder methods, those don't require you to load everything, and that's already tested. We're testing the links, we're mocking stuff that out. So now our tests are so much more smaller and so much more compact. We're not loading an entire file structure up, right? And I think that using this technique, what you're going to find is that you're writing smaller tests. Your tests no longer require these ginormous, ridiculous setup methods to load up everything. You're stubbing things out. Anything that is not like within the thing itself gets tested somewhere else. Cool. Questions up to here. Garrett.
Yeah. So when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about a couple things. Like,
Yeah.
the first thing I'm thinking about is like the types. So right here, we've linked all of our methods to the type of data that they're accessing, but I feel like also like the types of methods that we're using have like patterns to them, in the sense that like we have some types of methods that are like consistently across, different methods, like collecting data or gathering data, versus like other methods that are like processing that data essentially. Yep. And so like, when I look at team manager, I think like the team, for example, will be a pretty like lean class, in that it will seemingly have mostly just like the sort of end object, right? Which is just like the team, like the answer kind of, whereas like the team manager is doing a lot of like the heavy lifting of like finding the data, sorting the data, and giving the clean data to the team to kind of hold that. Am I thinking about that right? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think that like the idea is that there's certain heaviness that will go in the manager classes. And I think I would expect that most of the heavy stuff, the heavy lifting, is going to be in your manager classes and individual classes. Right. I would expect that your stat tracker class, the methods in here, you'll have a lot of methods. That's what the spec says, but they will be more in the way of like, hey, get me this answer. Hey, get me that answer. Right? Because it is the one object that knows about everything. Eduardo?
So now my question is, how are you linking your managers to your stat tracker if we would normally use an instance variable and create an instance of a class, but that's not the case with these managers because they're keeping track of all the other instances.
Yeah, that'll come in part 2 next week. I'm kidding, not next week, like after the POM. Other questions before? That would be cruel if I said again next week. I'll tell you right after it's due. Yeah, so I just want to check any other questions about the structure of this, and then we'll get into like the kind of like how the code works after the Pomodoro break. George?
Yeah, I guess when you're talking about like a manager, you're specifically talking about a separate class. That's what you're talking about, right? Yes. Okay. Okay, cool.
Manager is just the first word that came into my mind. Some people use words like repository because it is in charge of all things. Could perhaps say controller is a thing that a word you can use. And the reason why we're kind of structuring this the way we are is because like you will draw a lot of parallels with this in how you work on things in the future. This is like kind of like a little, some foreshadowing of a lot of stuff you'll see in the future. Cool. All right. So, wait. Curtis?
So is something like this, like diagramming out and figuring out these roles, like, is that something generally you would do at the beginning of a project or like as you start refactoring?
Well, I would normally do it this way when thinking about how the structure lies out ahead of time. The idea is that we did not tell you to this until now because we want you to see what it's like without it.
Okay.
Right? Like I keep saying, like doing things the wrong way is the best way to learn how to do it the right way or a better way. Because you understand, you see for real what that pain is. Right? Cool. Taylor?
So just so I have it straight here, the game manager, like the team manager, would be storing
teams.
Would they be, so they would be creating each individual team object data?
Yep.
Then what is the, okay. So it's just creating, team is just going to be like a simple object.
Yep.
And that's just
That holds information and later on some methods.
Okay.
I think, give me a second here. Like to start with, like you might add some other methods that might help you out. Like for example, in a game object, right? Why not have a total score method in your game object? That'll just tell you the total score, right? Like I think that's a simple example. I'm like, hey, that's not something that's specifically, I don't think that's specific in the spec, right? That there's a total score method in your game. Someone correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't think that there is.
Right.
No.
But when we think about it, doesn't having a total score method in your game object just make life a lot easier for you? Like if you, instead of having to figure out like the total score of a game somewhere else, I'm like, why not have the game do that for us? Right. And that's the idea. It's like for the idea, or like one thing you could do is that like the game has an attribute of away team ID. Why not have a method in there as well that will just give us the away team, the team object for the away team, right? So you could have like a method that's def away team that will traverse that tree, grab you the team back, right? Like the idea is that we put this in here to make this a lot more kind of like quality of life stuff and extensible in the future.
Cool.
So,
So,
right. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So so the team manager would be depending on both stat tracker and the team class, or I'm just trying to get like.
What do you mean by depending?
I guess.
I think I know where you're going with this question. Let's put a pin in this where I actually showed out with some code in a little bit.
Okay, cool.
Right, let's revisit this to make sure that we cleared up any kind of like your understanding of this at the end. But I think I know what you're asking for, and I want to show you what we're going to be doing.
Cool.
All right, so let's take a break. See you back at 3:35, where we will look at this in code. Cool, manager, and over here I would set data. Tracker and self. So essentially, when I'm creating a game manager object, I'm sending a reference of the stat tracker to the game manager. In the game manager, I'm receiving that reference and I'm storing it in tracker so I have access to it later on. When I'm creating a game object, I'm sending a reference to myself, and self in this context is game manager. So that the game has a reference to the game manager. And this is how we talk upwards. Talking downwards is relatively simple because the stat tracker can just, access the game manager, the game thing and whatnot. And so let's say, for example, I'll give you a concrete example of how we can talk upwards. If, let's say, for example, the thing I talked about previously was how we want the game to be able to tell us who the teams are. Does the game have a team ID? Game has an away team, right? Do we say, does the game have an away team? There's so many stats. So we can do def away team. And we want this message we want this method to be able to tell us, like to give me a team object back, right? And so we said like, hey, game, I need to know about teams. Who can the game talk to? The game can only talk to its game manager, right? And the only information the game has is away team ID, I think it's called. So what it's gonna do is I'm gonna like do some management, like, hey, manager, and this is kind of like this little bit of a what we call dream-driven development. Like, what do I want to name this? Like, I'd make a method called team by ID. right? Because I want to get a team. I want to look for that team by its ID, so that's why I chose this name. You can name it whatever you want as long as it makes sense to you. And I'm going to pass it the away team ID. Is that the name of the attribute? Yeah. Right? And that's all it does. And when I'm testing this, I just need to test that this method tries to talk when I stub it out, so that when I try to talk to manager, it just knows I'm trying to talk to the manager. I'm trying to call this method, and I want to make sure that it returns, like it takes one argument. Cool. So I go to my game manager. I want to move this over here just so we can see. And so like now that I expect there to be a team by ID method. And so I want to make one. Team by ID. And so the same thing applies, is that a game manager doesn't know squat about teams. So it's going to ask the stat tracker, give me team by ID. I'm going to pass in the ID I got from the team. Cool. And I'm over here by stat tracker. I'm going to mean a def team by ID method. And now the stat tracker is like, oh, I need to find teams. Who do I know that knows things about teams? Well, like the team manager, right? That sounds reasonable. So we go here and we like, hey, team manager. What was the method? There's a team manager of like find. You probably have something called find by ID. And you pass an ID. And essentially your team manager will scan through and look for the team that ID matches, and will pass it all the way back up. And passing the reference to its own self is how we can get things to talk to each other. So Eduardo and Taylor, does this kind of answer the questions you had from previously? I see one nod, I see a slower nod, okay. That's fine. Questions? Sean?
Yeah, I was actually more curious about the diagram, and when we're incorporating modules, where exactly would a module be placed on your diagram? Would it just be relevant to what it's using?
Let me where is my thing? Whiteboard, where are you? Oh, now we find out if the whiteboard doesn't disappear. Does it come back? Yes, it does. In this kind of situation, I don't think I would. What's sharing your module? I guess my question is. What objects use the module?
We haven't made one yet, but we can tell that there's a lot of data that is very similar, or a lot of data crunching. So we're not entirely sure. If I were to guess, it seems like the module might be at the same level of stat tracker, but it feels really wrong though.
Yeah, so like the idea is that your well, it's not really kind of a question of like where it belongs, in the fact that the module should be used as a tool in order to share code, right? So like I would say that modules should be a way to kind of remove code that is shared. So like I feel like a module would kind of like be here-ish in that it is something that is shared by your managers, right? Because I feel that like a module shouldn't have like a team should not have code in common with the game, nor should have code in common with the game team, right? Whereas like the last place would be like here-ish. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I guess it's all dependent on what we're doing with the module, what it needs access to.
Like potentially, like another thing I was talking about, like personally, I would probably like pull out, like I would have like a CSV thing that all these things hit, because like you're just loading data and the managers all do that. So like that's another potential use of it there. Cool, Kate.
So kind of building upon that, I think what I just saw you.
Can you say what are we building upon? Just so we're all clear.
The last question. because we were about to use modules, and one of the instances of it was taking a team ID and asking for the team name back. Now, we didn't have this set up exactly this way, so we were able to query the other data sets and say, hey, with this team ID, can you please give me back the team name? But the way you just set that up of going back to the stat tracker with that find ID thing, feels like a lot of those, hey, I need to go ask the team manager when I'm in season. At season, I'm equating to game team stuff. It feels like that kind of is going to replace a lot of what I originally had set as would be a module. Is you're just going to go back to stat tracker, and stat tracker is going to have something there that's going to go request that information from the other manager. Okay.
Right. The idea behind that is like we using a module in that way like builds this kind of mesh like structure we kind of want to avoid. We want to have clear lines. Like the idea is that verticals, well, I guess in this case horizontals, but like they should be isolated from each other. Because we kind of want to encapsulate the thing. We don't want functionality to kind of bleed through. Using a single module for this purpose is going to be using a single module, like it meshes a lot of functionality in one place and doesn't separate it out very well. I think that if you have an ID and want to get the team, I think that like maybe we don't need to ask for the team, just like ask for the team object and then grab the name from that. I don't think that you need to. I think that is probably the more efficient way to go about it rather than grabbing just the string. Like get the team object and just run the name method on that. Right? Because I think that like we generally want to work with objects for things rather than just like components of the object, like just the string. I don't really like working in raw kind of little bits on its own like that. I think that like if you need one piece of a thing, you're probably gonna need more of it later on, and just grab the thing from here. It'll be simpler. It'll be simpler. You'll write less code in the long run. Cool. Other questions? Taylor.
Do you ever I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. Do you ever pass in, like if there were multiple, like I know for this project, I guess there probably won't be, but if there were multiple instances of game manager being created, would you not then want that to be above a game object where there's multiple?
Well, I guess my question back is like what is the purpose of your intent in making multiple instances of game manager?
I don't know. I guess there wouldn't be any intent in this example at all, but I don't know. Like I'm just like wondering going forward, maybe that's not like a scenario you ever want to set up.
Yeah, I would avoid setting up that way, because the idea is that one manager is going to be responsible for one kind of object, right? And so like that like this idea of single responsibility principle, right? Is that this manager is going to handle all the game stuff, the team manager is going to handle just the team stuff. When we have, I'm sure there's probably a situation where there may be an argument to be made for multiple managers. I personally would kind of avoid that, because I think that we start introducing a lot of complexity and uncertainty. I think a good example of that is like how we talked about like single inheritance, right? If we refer upwards, like now we have to have like this conditional every single time we refer upwards to figure out, maybe not a conditional, but like we have to make a decision every single time which manager we got to hit, right? And I think that is not worth it. But I'm 100% sure there's probably an instance, like a use case where that makes complete sense and that is the preferred way to go. But for something like this, like I think in general, we want to have it like the less decisions you got to make, the less places things can go wrong,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Anything else? So lots of process. a lot to do. But I think that like the idea is that as things kind of progress, it'll make sense because like if you've gotten through most of the math already, like the math part, I think is the annoying part of this challenge, just needs to be moved in different places. And we are giving you, we have group check-ins tomorrow. And when you are not in a check-in, you're using the time to plan out your restructuring of your application. Garrett? I waited till you were doing that to call on you, by the way. It's on purpose. I totally did it on purpose.
Appreciate it.
Anytime.
So I think Kate had mentioned a little bit about some of like the game team stuff.
About what stuff?
The game team and like for example, I'm working on I was kind of working on the season statistics, and so this is I think kind of in line with part of what she was asking, just that season. Like I'm constantly working, right? You're constantly getting season, and then you're also working with the game team, but you're also working with the games file. So you're constantly kind of searching back and forth to get this different data. So like when I write like a method, right, and I start in game teams, I go up to stat tracker. So I would put like, I would put in the argument, like stat tracker or whatever the name for it is. And then would I have to write another method in stat tracker that's related to?
So the idea here is, let's say you're in game team, right? A game team object should only talk to the game team manager.
Yeah.
The game team manager should only talk to the stat tracker. We are not jumping from game team to stat tracker.
Sorry, so in the example I was laying out, I was starting in the GTM.
Yeah.
So starting the GTM, now I need to get information ultimately from GM. So I write some sort of method and an argument. I call the stat tracker to help me here.
Yep.
Then do I have to write another, like a related method in stat tracker to then have stat tracker go to GM to get information? Okay. So I have to, okay.
Yeah, and the idea here is that GM should already have a method that will get you what you need.
Yep.
Right? And so the idea is that we're trying to break these up into small little steps. So it's like, I'm asking this way, your tests clean up, your tests get lighter.
So stat tracker is going to have a lot of these quote unquote, like help find this information method.
Traffic direction, Traffic direction, communication method, I think that for funsies, I did a number of this. You all see my screen? Yeah. Put it. So I started a little bit. And just like playing around with it. Let me make this a little bigger. So this is kind of like what my stat tracker looks like. It's not complete. Like I just started and then my hands got tired typing, so I stopped. But like essentially it looks a lot like this. It's just like, hey, go get me the thing. And so forth. Cool. Other questions as we kind of wrap up? Will?
So is this, just trying to understand the overall benefit of this design, is it more about simplicity of testing, or is this also speed up the whole thing?
Well, the actual searching of data gets a little slower because you got to go up a couple of jumps. But the idea is that the benefits is that your test suite's should be running a lot faster because you're no longer loading everything for every single thing. It also reduces complexity. It makes your application more resilient to change. If you have to make changes, you have to make changes in fewer places. Because I know for me, if I have like a very enmeshed kind of like code and I need to make a change somewhere, like I'm going to forget one place. that I need to make the change. Like that's just life. You're gonna forget one place. That's just what happens. So it's like there's a lot of different reasons why we want to do it this way. Garrett, is that a hand from before or is that a new one? Cool. Anyone else? Cool. Y'all are set. I'll upload this up as soon as we're done. Have a good rest of your evening. We're going to try to get back your independent challenge feedback tonight. There's a lot of you, and there's a lot of code to write, but we're going to get on that. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Mike.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Mike.